Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot, ancient, and oddly bureaucratic. Picture this. The sun rises over Thebes, warm gold pouring onto mud brick walls. The air already thick with the scent of dust, grain, and distant river water. You're not a pharaoh, not a priest, not even a merchant. You're something rarer, stranger. You're a scribe. And today, you start your shift, not with sword in hand, but with a sharpened reed pen, a jar of ink, and a head full of numbers. You probably won't survive this job without at least 3 papyrus cuts and a run-in with a temple cat who thinks your ink pot is its water dish. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere cozy, let me know in the comments where you are and what time it is. I love seeing who's wide awake or falling asleep all over the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the courtyard, the stone beneath your sandals already warming with sunrise. Everything glows amber. The palms, the rooftops, even the chickens pecking around your ankles. Your robe clings slightly from the humidity, and somewhere in the distance, someone is yelling about missing dates. The fruit kind, not the romantic kind. Mena, your mentor and resident sarcasm expert, is already seated on a low stool outside the scribe quarters. His legs are crossed. His pen is sharp. His expression says, "If you're late, I'll make you copy festival lists all afternoon." You mutter a greeting, but he just points at the bench beside him. You sit. This is where your day begins, not with battles or gods, but with a rough slab of limestone, a small board, and ink made from soot and acacia gum. You pull out your own reed pen and glance toward the wall. Today's assignments are listed in neat hieratic script, the everyday version of Egypt's famed hieroglyphs. It's like cursive for sacred paperwork. And yes, it's somehow even more cryptic. Mena leans toward you. "Start with the grain receipts," he says, like he's sentencing you to copy every sneeze in temple history. You nod and take a breath. The first strokes are slow, careful, like walking a tightrope. A mistake here, and you're not just wasting ink, you're inviting someone's wrath. Or worse, a correction from the registrar who hasn't smiled since the reign of Amenhotep. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Egypt, scribes were the elite few who could read and write. Their training often began in childhood and lasted years, covering religious texts, tax ledgers, festival rosters, and legal documents. They weren't just clerks. They were the human hard drives of the state. You glance up as a temple boy runs past, his arms full of scrolls and a look of pure panic on his face. A goat follows him. No one seems surprised. You try not to laugh. If you smudge this line, you'll have to start again. The courtyard fills slowly with the clatter of sandals, the rustle of linen robes, and the occasional sneeze from someone allergic to dust or dates. It's a morning orchestra Low, repetitive, strangely soothing. Then comes the shriek, not from a person, from a stylus being dropped point first onto stone. Someone across the courtyard groans. "Not again," says Mena, without looking up. You glance over and see another apprentice cradling a snapped reed pen like it's a broken bone. His master just sighs and mutters something about the gods punishing sloppy alignment. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient Egyptians believed a badly written name could offend the spirit it belonged to. So yes, your handwriting wasn't just judged. It might be cursed. No pressure. You shift slightly on your bench, careful not to smear your current line. The ink dries fast in this heat, but not fast enough when the wind shifts and throws a few stray date pits across your page. Typical. Mena finishes a line and wipes his pen with a scrap of cloth. "Do you know," he says conversationally, "that the pharaoh once delayed a temple festival because the scroll copy was 3 onions short?" You blink. Really? Historians still argue whether it was sabotage or a clerical error, he replies, smirking. But yes, the gods almost didn't get their offering because someone miscounted tubers. You nod solemnly. The power of papyrus is real. Another line done. Your hand starts to cramp. You flex your fingers and notice a small blister already forming on your thumb. The mark of someone who writes too much and lifts too little. The sun rises higher, heating the air. The sandstone walls shimmer, and the smell of fresh ink starts to blend with morning sweat and roasted chickpeas from the vendor just outside the gate. You are a scribe in training, sitting on a stone bench, documenting the movement of grain, fish, goats, and onions across an empire older than nearly any you've heard of. You're not rich, you're not famous, but you are a keeper of memory, and memory, here, matters more than gold. The next scroll, waiting for you, smells faintly of myrrh and disappointment. It's the livestock ledger. Rows upon rows of entries listing the temple's goats, cattle, and donkeys, with notes on which ones wandered, which ones birthed twins, and which ones mysteriously vanished, usually into someone's stew pot. You unroll it carefully, trying not to breathe too hard on the brittle edge. Mena leans over. "You've got the goats again. They must like you." You squint at the tiny red marks, denoting missing inventory. "They like to disappear," you mutter. He grins. "It's because you respect them." You begin copying the list. Each entry a mix of symbols and numbers. Your pen dancing through the day's monotony. The reed squeaks slightly when the ink runs low. You dab it, reload, and continue. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian temples functioned like major bureaucratic hubs. They owned land, herds, granaries, and laborers. Scribes kept track of it all. Taxes owed, animals born, fields harvested. Without them, the entire system collapsed. A scribe's work might not involve swords, but it could ruin a village if done poorly. You shift your weight on the bench and try to ignore the goat bleeding directly outside the window. It's staring at you, like it knows. Mena follows your gaze. "That one's named Heka. He bit a priest last week. You nod slowly. Respect. Across the courtyard, a pair of priests argue over festival logistics. One waves a scroll like a battle standard. The other gestures at the sun. You can't hear them clearly, but you can tell no one is winning. Quirky tidbit. In many temples, the timing of a festival depended not just on the calendar, but on celestial alignments, flood patterns, and, sometimes, a scribe's interpretation of old omen scrolls. More than one celebration was postponed because Venus rose at the wrong angle, or because a scribe sneezed during divination. You're halfway through the livestock list when Mena taps your arm. "Come on," he says. "Field inspection." You blink. "Now?" He shrugs. "Can't copy what hasn't been confirmed." You tuck your pen into your belt and follow him across the courtyard, through the southern gate, and into the wide fields beyond the temple wall. The sunlight here is harsher, the ground more fragrant, rich with silt and manure. You walk past barley stalks nearly as tall as you, their golden heads swaying like sleepy dancers. The field clerk waits at the edge, wearing a wide straw hat and a permanent scowl. He carries a wooden tally board and a small pouch of pebbles for counting. He nods at Mena. 6 calves, he says without preamble. Mena raises a brow. "I counted 5 last week. One was hiding." "Convenient," you mutter. The clerk glares. "Go look if you want." You and Mena trudge through the low paddock fence, careful not to disturb the cattle. They eye you lazily, flicking their tails. You count them aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, and yes, there's a tiny calf behind its mother. "Sleeping," you nod. He's right. The clerk smirks and marks his board. Add it. You pull your tablet from your satchel and record the update in fresh black strokes. The sun makes the wax soft, and you have to be careful not to smear it with your palm. Mena hands you a bit of cloth to rest your hand on. "You're learning," he says. "Most people smear it once and blame the gods." Tempting, you admit. You finish logging the count, tuck the tablet away, and glance around. The land stretches wide and shimmering, dotted with small huts, irrigation canals, and the occasional papyrus bush. The smell of fresh-cut stalks drifts on the breeze. Mena points at a nearby reed thicket. That'll be scrolls in a month. You try to imagine it. Tall green stalks becoming neat rolled sheets filled with ink, numbers, names. It's a strange magic. Historians still argue whether Egyptian scribes truly respected the materials they worked with, or if papyrus was just a tool to them. But when you see how it starts, raw and swampy, and ends as something weightless and eternal, it's hard not to feel reverent. You walk back toward the temple in silence. The courtyard is fuller now. Vendors have arrived selling figs, chickpea paste, and grilled onions wrapped in leaves. The air is rich with scent and noise. You're tempted to grab a snack, but Mena pulls you toward the record room. "Lunch after you tally the grain rations," he says. You groan but follow. Inside, the air is cooler. Thick walls, keeping out the worst of the heat. The shelves are lined with scrolls, sorted by region and year, tied with cords dyed in various colors for quick access. A goat once tried to eat one. It didn't end well. For the goat, you sit at a clean table. The grain scroll is already unrolled, waiting. You dip your pen, start writing, and as the characters flow again, it hits you. This is how empires stay standing. Not just with walls and weapons, but with ledgers, receipts, and very, very grumpy goats. Lunch is a distant dream as you work your way through the grain rations. The scroll crackles slightly each time you adjust its position, like dry reeds in the wind. You copy line after line, names of households, amounts of emmer wheat allotted, little notes like withheld for late tribute or bonus granted for canal maintenance. It's as much about people as it is about food. Mena sits nearby, reviewing last week's figures. Occasionally, he clicks his tongue or makes a low humming sound that means a mistake was found somewhere by someone, and someone else is now in deep trouble. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian scribes didn't just write, they audited. Their records had to be exact because grain wasn't just food, it was currency. Salaries, taxes, bribes, temple offerings, all measured in sheaves and sacks. A single slip in a ration log could lead to famine or revolt. You pause to rub your cramping wrist. The reed pen isn't heavy, but the repetition wears you down, like carving grooves into your own bones. You glance toward the window where heat shimmers off the stone. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circles lazily. You're leaning too hard, Mena says without looking up. Use your arm, not your fingers. You adjust your posture and keep going. The rhythm returns. Dip, stroke, lift, breathe. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes used wax tablets to draft long entries before committing them to scrolls. Others just winged it. One famously confident scribe inscribed an entire treaty, only to realize he'd misspelled the pharaoh's name in the opening line. That tablet now sits in a museum, proof that typos are eternal. A bell rings outside, faint but clear. The lunch signal. Mena doesn't move. 3 more lines, he mutters. You suppress a groan and press on. The smell of roasted barley cakes is drifting in now, cruel and distracting. You glance toward the door. A cat slinks past, tail high, eyes closed, as if judging your discipline. You finish the 3 lines. Mena stands. You're slow but accurate. That counts. I'll take it, you say, stretching your neck until it cracks. The dining courtyard is shaded with reed mats. You sit cross-legged on a low platform beside a few other scribes. The food is simple. Bread, figs, pickled onions. But after a morning of numbers and names, it tastes like a feast. You listen to the chatter around you. One apprentice grumbles about a broken inkstone. Another brags about spotting a comet last night. Mena just eats in silence, occasionally glancing at the grain scroll you brought with you. Historians still argue whether scribes held real social power or were just glorified clerks. Some held high positions in court. Others died broke in a village hut. But for a few hours, here in the shade, you're just part of a weary, ink-stained tribe. After lunch, you return to the archive. It smells like dust, beeswax, and old papyrus. Scroll racks line the walls, each one labeled with a symbol: crops, livestock, temple rites, weather omens, death records. You pass one rack labeled with the symbol for miscellaneous. It leans suspiciously to one side, as if tired of holding the secrets no one else wants to file. Your task? Reorganize the offerings records. Each scroll details who gave what, how much, and why. Dates, family names, temple locations, and whether the offering was accepted. Some scrolls have doodles in the margins. One has a crude drawing of a donkey with a caption that reads, "This one kicked." You sort them by month, then by donor, then cross-reference against the divine calendar. The pile shifts slightly when you sneeze, nearly toppling 3 weeks of fish-based offerings. Mena wanders in and sees the chaos. "Organized," he says dryly, like a sandstorm. You glare at him. "I sneezed." He shrugs. "So did the last guy. That's why we're fixing it." You spend the afternoon cross-checking entries. You find duplicate records, missing ones. One that says offering of roasted duck, but clearly has a barley stain on it. You gently erase the error, recopy the correct line, and wonder if duck ever really made it into the temple or just into someone's lunch. Mainstream historical fact. Offerings to the gods weren't just religious gestures. They were economic transactions. Temples redistributed surplus to workers and priests. Keeping accurate records was crucial to avoid divine embarrassment and very earthly hunger. As the light begins to shift, you unroll the final scroll. It's thinner than the rest. Only a few names. One is yours. You blink. "Why am I listed as an offering?" Mena leans in. "That's the volunteer scroll. You signed up to copy festival hymns." You stare at it. "I don't remember doing that." He grins. "It was the day we had beer with lunch." "Ah, that tracks." You set the scroll aside and sit back. The work is endless. The pay is mostly symbolic. But somehow, you feel more awake now than when you started. You've copied hundreds of lines today, tracked goats, counted calves, filed fish, corrected ducks. You lean your head against the wall and close your eyes for just a moment. The archive sighs around you, quiet, cool, eternal. You whisper, "I hate sand in the ink pot." Mena chuckles. You're learning. The sun begins to slump in the sky, and with it, your energy. Afternoon shadows stretch across the floor of the archive like spilled ink. The heat clings to your skin now, dense and sleepy. Mena hands you a fresh sheet of papyrus with that same casual menace he reserves for surprise assignments. "Ledger copying," he says, "but from the red scroll." You raise an eyebrow. The red scroll is not infamous exactly, but it's long, unforgiving. Mostly lists of taxes, border disputes, and minor catastrophes, like grain barge capsized near Memphis. You settle into your bench, The reed pen in your hand feels heavier than this morning. You dip it, exhale, and begin. Mainstream historical fact. Red ink was used in ancient Egypt to indicate headings, divine names, or warnings. Scribes kept separate brushes for red and black inks, often switching mid-scroll with practiced ease. This dual ink system was both practical and symbolic. Red had power. As your pen glides through the opening lines, district names, tribute amounts, side notes in sharp red, you get a little lost in the rhythm. The columns seem to hum. The way the characters fall into place feels like laying bricks, solid, structured, permanent. Then you find a strange entry, 35 goats, withheld due to lunar disagreement. You stare. Mena? He doesn't look up. Let me guess. Lunar goats? Lunar disagreement. He chuckles. That's probably Nessie. He refuses to tithe on new moons. You blink. But it's a goat. Exactly. Welcome to tax law. You keep writing, amused and confused in equal measure. The further you go, the weirder it gets. One record notes a grain shortage due to excessive mourning. Another says, ox fell asleep mid-ceremony, re-performed rite, ox uninterested, quirky tidbit. Scribes were often required to transcribe religious rituals verbatim, even if the rituals went wrong. The scrolls contain everything, from flubbed incantations to animals wandering off mid-offering. Nothing was erased. History in Egypt included the bloopers. The ink on your scroll begins to darken as the sun fades. You squint under the dimming light and almost write morning instead of morning. Mena stops you with a tap on the scroll. Ink thickens. Time to stop. You nod, shaking out your fingers. The tendons crack like dry reeds. Outside, the courtyard is cooler. A few scribes lounge beneath the sycamore, passing around a jar of water and a handful of dried dates. You join them. Someone offers you a piece of date cake. It crumbles in your hand but tastes sweet and grounding. A boy nearby is practicing glyphs on a broken pot shard. He holds it like treasure, tongue sticking out in concentration. He messes up one stroke, sighs loudly, and starts again. You remember being that kid? Or maybe you still are. Mena strolls by, drops a folded piece of linen into your lap. Festival duty roster, he says. Tomorrow morning. You unfold it. Your name is third on the list. You really like assigning me things, you murmur. He winks. I'm teaching you how to be useful, or at least look busy. Historians still argue whether scribes genuinely enjoyed their work or were just cogs in an ink-stained machine. Some letters suggest pride, others frustration. But what's clear is that being a scribe meant being indispensable. Everything depended on the written word, even goat tithes. As the stars appear, tiny and scattered, you wander toward your sleeping quarters. The sky is a smear of purple and gold. Distant chanting floats from the temple compound, low and slow, like the Nile sighing in its sleep. Your chamber is small. One mat, one stool, one shelf with your reed pens, a lump of ink, and a chipped cup for water. A wax tablet rests beside your bed, covered in notes and half-thoughts. You trace a line from this morning: offerings, smudged duck. Check source. You light a small oil lamp and pull out the practice scroll. No assignments, no deadlines, just a clean sheet and the space to breathe. You try a few glyphs, then a proverb, then the opening to a story you half remember from your childhood. The one about the scribe who tricked a crocodile into writing poetry. You add a line in red ink, just because you can. Then carefully, you roll the scroll. Seal it. Place it beside your others. The quiet is almost holy. You lie down. Let your arm fall across your eyes. And for the first time all day, you don't think about goats, just ink. And the stories it holds, the morning smells different today. Less like baked clay and temple incense, more like marsh water and sliced stalks. You follow Mena out of the scribal compound, past the usual courtyards and fish vendors, to a quieter edge of Thebes where the city's breath seems to pause. This is not the direction of scrolls completed. This is where scrolls begin. He says nothing as you walk, only nods toward a low-roofed shed with open sides and bundles of green-stalked plants stacked in neat rows. The Papyrus workshop. You've copied hundreds of scrolls by now, but this is your first time seeing where the story truly starts. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian papyrus was crafted from Cyprus papyrus, a plant native to the Nile's marshy edges. The stalks were harvested, sliced into thin strips, soaked, then layered in perpendicular rows. Pressure and sap turned them into paper, and the result was scrolls so durable that some survive today. Inside, workers move rhythmically. No chants, no orders. Just the swish of stalks and the gentle slap of wet strips being laid onto boards. One man slices a stalk with a copper blade, revealing pale ribbons inside. A woman beside him layers them carefully, first horizontally, then vertically, fingers tapping like she's aligning a puzzle only she understands. The mood is calm, focused, sacred, almost. You step closer and pick up a fresh strip. It's soft, pliable, a little sticky with sap. The scent is earthy, sweet, and faintly metallic. You wonder how it goes from this fragile thing to the dry, crisp sheets that hold tax laws and marriage contracts and angry letters about missing dates. Mena gestures toward a pile of drying sheets. They'll be polished with shells, he says, then cut, rolled, bundled. You imagine the journey, from swamp to scroll, from reed to word, from nature to record. All of Egypt's memories start in mud. Quirky tidbit: the smoothest, highest quality papyrus came from the inner core of the stalk. Lower grade sheets were sometimes reused, wiped clean with water and rubbed smooth. These palimpsests occasionally reveal ghostly traces of previous writings, like ancient post-it notes whispering from beneath the surface. The workshop supervisor, a tall woman with soot on her forearms and a scroll tucked into her belt, approaches Mena. They trade greetings, then goods. One bundle of fresh papyrus in exchange for a sealed scroll, and 2 handfuls of flax cord. Business, as always, is ink-bound. You linger a moment longer, watching a boy polish a finished sheet with a piece of smooth stone. His hands move in small, circular motions, like buffing a prayer into the page. The surface begins to shine, catching the afternoon light. Outside, Mena kneels beside the path and ties the sheets into a reed basket. The cord he uses is flax twined, dyed red with crushed ochre. The basket itself is beautiful, symmetrical, tightly woven, labeled with a piece of linen painted in ink. You say, "We could frame that." He shrugs. "It's just a supply order." But it isn't. Not really. It's ritual, craft, a gesture of care for something most people will never see. Historians still argue whether scribes cared deeply about their tools or just treated them as necessities. But the artifacts we found, pen cases carved with names, ink pots painted with protective gods, hint that aesthetics mattered, at least a little. You walk back through the marshy air, basket in tow. Your fingertips are still damp from papyrus sap, and the breeze feels cooler against your skin. It smells like water, like origin. As you near the scriptorium, you pass a small shade pavilion where two boys are practicing glyphs. They're using discarded strips of papyrus, some too short, some crumpled or warped by damp. Their brushes dip and scratch. One of them has written, "A good scribe drinks before writing." His friend corrects him, "After writing." You chuckle. Another boy writes, "I hate sand in the ink pot." A universal truth, mainstream, historical fact. Egyptian scribes carried their own writing kits, often including reed pens, a small jar of water, a grinding stone, and a cake of black or red ink. These kits were sometimes buried with them, proof that writing wasn't just a job. It was an identity that endured beyond life. Back at the hall, Mena sets the basket down with a grunt. "Ready? For what?" "Tax ledger." You groan. "Again?" He grins. "Again." You follow him through the halls, where the light slants through high windows and dances across scroll racks. You pass a boy carrying a cracked tablet, a girl carefully labeling a document with red ink. Everyone here is mid-task, mid-sentence, mid-something. There are no idle hands, only resting pens. In the ledger room, a scribe slides over the latest volume. It's annotated heavily. Red ink, black ink, even smudged blue from someone's experimental pigment test. You unroll the scroll, adjust your seat, and begin. Again, like breathing. And just like that, the reeds of the Nile become words on the page. The marsh becomes memory. The knife becomes a pen, and the paper, once soaked and pressed and dried under shell, becomes the surface where a civilization records itself. You lean over your scroll and think, not about taxes or ink costs, but about that boy polishing papyrus, about the girl with soot on her arms, about the basket that felt like art. And you write, because you can, because someone has to, because stories, even the boring ones, begin with a plant. You're halfway through a line about grain quotas when your reed pen splinters. It doesn't snap dramatically. No thunderclap, no scream, just a soft crack, like a bread crust breaking. And suddenly, the fine line you were drawing becomes a jagged blot, bleeding into the papyrus. Mena glances over. Tool failure? You hold up the fractured reed. He doesn't even pause. Limestone shards in the ink kit. You sigh, dig around in your satchel, and find it. Your sharpening stone, smooth-edged and chalk white. You squat beside the low bench and begin the quiet ritual every scribe knows by heart. Shave, dip, test. Shave, dip, test. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian scribes didn't use knives to sharpen their pens. Instead, they carried small shards of limestone or sandstone, which they used to file their reed nibs into points. The exact angle varied depending on the glyph and the scribe's personal flair. Some favored bold strokes. Others preferred fine, whispery lines. As you grind and reshape the reed, ink stains your fingertips. The grain of the stone warms slightly under your hand. There's something oddly meditative about it, like tuning an instrument. When you finally test the nib and find it writes cleanly, you exhale. You're back. But by then, the ledger room has shifted. 2 more scribes have joined, both older, both humming tunelessly under their breath. One has a small brush stuck behind his ear. The other is copying legal codes with the frown of a man memorizing every word as he writes it. You notice a peculiar note in the margin of his scroll. Property dispute. Resolution. Chicken bribe accepted. Mena leans over. Classic. Chicken bribes? Better than goat feuds. You return to your task. The ledger is complex. The handwriting from the previous scribe is ambitious. Not quite illegible, but enthusiastic in its flourishes. You squint at a line that seems to say, 18 sacks of barley, owed from a dead ox. Then another that reads, claim disputed, ox denies involvement. You make a note in the margin, just in case. Quirky tidbit. Ancient scribes occasionally inserted jokes, complaints, or side notes into official documents. Some included drawings, little cats, crude faces, or private doodles and otherwise solemn texts. One scroll features a scribe who sarcastically corrected himself 3 times, each more exaggerated than the last. You glance around and realize you're surrounded by people who spend their days writing the world into memory, not telling stories necessarily, just preserving them. Recording the mundane, the messy, the misheard. Historians still argue whether this makes scribes mere functionaries or unsung artists. Were they bureaucrats or archivists of civilization's heartbeat? Perhaps a bit of both. They didn't shape the stories, but without them, the stories vanish. By midday, your shoulders ache. You flex your fingers. The callus on your writing thumb throbs slightly. You switch hands for a moment. An old trick, learned back when you were copying festival chants for the 15th time. You unroll the scroll a little farther. This section is about temple debts. Mostly numbers, some prayers, and one irritated note that reads, Horus image, regilding delayed. budget absorbed by fish offerings. You nearly snort aloud. Mena offers you a dried fig without looking up. Keep going, he says. Lunch if we finish this column. You eat the fig. It sticks to your teeth, but the sweetness wakes up your brain. Ink glides easier when you're chewing. You wonder briefly if anyone's ever written a scroll while dancing. Then you realize that's probably how they came up with the hymn layouts. Your pen scratches forward, word by word, line by line. Outside, voices echo through the alley. Someone selling fish. Someone else is chasing a goat. There's a sharp clang, maybe a dropped pot. The city is alive, noisy, sun-blasted. But here, in the cool hush of the ledger room, time slows. You're not writing Egypt's history. You're preserving its present. By the time you reach the final line, balance settled, pending ink inventory, you feel oddly triumphant. You stretch your arms and blow gently across the papyrus, helping the last few glyphs dry. Mena checks the work, nods once. Clean enough? You almost take offense. I bled for that line. Yeah, well, Egypt thanks you. You roll the scroll carefully, wrap it in linen, and slide it onto the finished rack. Outside, the light has shifted. The day's golden edge begins to curl into soft shadow. The bench calls again, but this time not for work. This time, just to sit. You ease yourself down, stretch your legs, and listen to the soft sounds of the hall. Pens dipping, scrolls rustling, a sneeze from someone deep in the tax codes, and you think, this is it. The ink, the stone, the fig, the line about the ox, it's all part of it. The real story of scribes isn't just about grand decrees or sacred hymns. It's this: broken pens, chicken bribes, quiet competence, because someone has to remember the shape of things, even if the thing is a particularly stubborn ox. The sun tips low over Thebes, casting long shadows that slant like hieroglyphs across the street. You and Mena step into the open, a rolled ledger tucked under his arm, and for a moment you both pause, neither speaking, neither moving, just breathing. He gestures down a narrower path. Come, there's one more place. You've learned not to ask too many questions. When a master scribe says, one more place, it could mean anything, from a storage room full of cracked wax tablets to a roof garden with secret poetry scrolls. Turns out it's neither. You're heading toward the market square, still bustling, even this late. Children chasing each other with palm fronds, merchants stacking the last of their onions into baskets. A goat, again. There's always a goat. But Mena doesn't stop at a vendor or a shrine. He steers you to a low stone building with a faded painting of the god Thoth, ibis-headed and serene, on the lintel. Inside, it's cooler, dimmer, and full of shelves, lots of them, row after row of wooden shelves packed with scrolls, some wrapped, some exposed. Some tied with reed cord, others slipped into ceramic tubes. Mainstream historical fact. Egypt's great archives weren't all housed in palatial temples. Many local repositories, especially in provincial towns, existed in modest structures like this one. These regional scriptoria managed local tax records, festival schedules, legal transactions, and even personal letters, all logged and categorized by scribes and junior archivists. Mena greets the old man at the front desk with a nod. Young one needs to see the index. The old man, his eyes clouded, but hand steady, motions for you to approach. He places a wax tablet in front of you. On it, an alphabetical list. Names, dates, references to scrolls. You blink. This is the filing system. Quirky tidbit. While we often romanticize scroll libraries, many Egyptian archives had surprisingly effective indexing systems. Tablets, wooden tags, and even color-coded linen ties were used to mark categories. Some archivists developed personal symbols, tiny, private pictographs that they used to indicate things like pending correction or duplicate stored elsewhere. You scan the wax lines, tracing them with your stylus. A mark next to a festival record catches your eye. A triangle with a dot in the center. You raise an eyebrow. Clerical dispute, the old man mutters, over a hymns meter. Very serious. You try not to laugh. Mena moves toward the back, searching for something. You follow slowly, soaking in the dusty quiet. The place smells like dry ink and old paper, comforting in a way you can't quite explain. He stops at a shelf near the corner, pulls out a small scroll. Open it. You do. It's your handwriting. You stare. It's one of your early transcriptions, painstakingly copied from a worn tax register. You remember the day. Remember sweating over every barley measurement, worried you'd mess up and accidentally accuse someone of evading goat tribute. Mena taps the scroll gently. Still in use. You blink again. It is? He nods. Cross-referenced last month for a land dispute. Your figures were correct. No errors. You try not to smile like an idiot. Historians still argue whether scribes truly understood the reach of their records, or if they were simply cogs in a system too large to grasp. But moments like this, they feel personal, intimate, like leaving your fingerprints on time. Mena replaces the scroll and guides you to a bench tucked behind a support pillar. You sit, and he pulls a tiny pen case from his robe, wooden, polished, carved, with a faded lotus blossom. Inside, 2 reed pens, a black ink cake, and a tiny amulet shaped like a seated baboon. Thoth, he says, for focus. You nod. It's quiet here. The city's noise muffled by thick walls and heavier air. You glance at the scroll racks. All those names. All those lives. Preserved in ink and effort. You murmur. How long do they last? Mena shrugs. Some fade in decades. Others last centuries. Depends on storage and luck. But they're not forever. He smiles softly. Nothing is. That's not the point. You tilt your head. The point, he continues, is to leave behind something clear enough that the next person doesn't get lost. You sit with that for a long time. Outside, someone plays a reed flute, off-key but earnest. A cart creaks down the road. Somewhere, another scribe is probably finishing a line about harvest taxes and praying the ink doesn't run out. You close your eyes briefly, and in the dark behind your eyelids, you see lines, glyphs, red and black, crisp and curling. Words taking shape not because of magic or mystery, but because someone sat down, dipped a pen, and cared enough to copy them. When you open your eyes, Mena has already stood. He's waiting near the door. You rise, stretch, and glance once more at the scroll racks. They feel lighter now, like they're watching you back. The streets are quieter as you and Mena leave the archive. The sky has softened into that dusky golden hue Thebes does so well. Somewhere between old papyrus and melted honey. You walk in silence for a while, your feet brushing sand into narrow gutters. Your thoughts heavier than your sandals. Mena veers off toward a side courtyard, one you haven't visited before. There's no grand entrance, no columns or banners, just a low doorway marked with a painted ibis. Again, Thoth, watching over scribes like a silent manager who never misses a typo. Inside, the room is long, low, and lined with flat stone work tables. The walls are carved with prayers for clarity, patience, and neat handwriting. You can almost hear the generations of muttering scribes who came before you. There are 3 other people here, scribes, you assume, each hunched over a board, one foot tucked up beneath them, reed pens in hand. One is older, with a beard that dips into his ink pot if he's not careful. Another, a young woman, has rings on every finger and writes with a speed that feels like showing off. The third is humming quietly as he scribes a hymn. Mena nods to them and leads you to the back, where a stone shelf holds clean boards, fresh pens, and small bowls of water. You settle into a corner, and he sets down a blank sheet of papyrus before you. Try, he says simply. Mainstream historical fact. Training scribes practiced not just letters, but spacing, proportion, and balance. A good scribe was part artist, part engineer. Boards were often coated with a thin layer of gesso or plaster for dry runs, scraped off and reused endlessly. Only when one was precise and fluid enough did the ink touch papyrus. You hold the pen, dip it gently, and pause. What do you write? Mena shrugs. Start with something familiar, so you write your name. The ink dries almost instantly in the warm air. You write it again, slower, again, smaller. The rhythm comes back like muscle memory. The little curl on the second glyph, the slant on the third. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes developed unique personal flourishes, stylized signatures, hidden marks, or even tiny animal doodles slipped into the margins of their work. It wasn't standard practice, but among scribes, flair was like cologne. A little could make you memorable. Too much, and people talked. You experiment with a tiny lotus flower in the corner. Mena raises an eyebrow, but doesn't object. Around the room, the other scribes continue their silent work. The only sounds are the whisper of reeds on parchment and the occasional throat clearing. You like it here. It feels like a warm library if libraries could hum. Mena leans over and taps your sheet. Balance is better, he murmurs. The spacing between the last two glyphs, cleaner now. You hadn't even noticed. Try a proverb, he suggests. You think. Then write. Even a cat remembers its first sunbeam. He chuckles. Who taught you that one? You grin. You did. The older scribe glances up and smirks. That was my proverb 10 years ago. Historians still argue whether Egyptian proverbs were memorized, passed down orally, or copied from official lists. Some believe scribes made them up on the spot, using them to test apprentices' handwriting under pressure. Others think they were assigned, like poetic homework. Either way, they stuck. The sun slips lower. A breeze finds its way in through the shuttered window, stirring the edges of your papyrus. You blow gently on the ink, then roll the sheet and place it with care on the side shelf. Mena says nothing, just nods. That's all you need. You step back out into the street, the familiar warmth settling over you like a cloak. The day is nearly done, and yet not over. Mena glances at the horizon. We have time. You don't ask what for. He leads you down a narrow alley, past a crumbling statue of Bastet and a boy feeding pigeons. The smell of warm bread wafts from a window. You pass a painter mixing ochre, an old woman counting dates, and a priest in saffron robes reading aloud to himself. The temple steps appear, worn smooth by centuries of feet. You follow Mena up them, slower now, your legs remembering every glyph you just practiced. At the top, he doesn't take you to the altar or the sacred garden. He takes you to the roof. The view is absurdly peaceful. The Nile glimmers in the distance. The city breathes below, bustling but gentle. You can see the tops of scroll racks through open windows, and the shadow of a cat stretching along a sun-warmed sill. Mena hands you a small scroll, unmarked, blank. You'll need this soon. You nod. No words necessary. You tuck it into your satchel. He stretches out on a sun-warmed bench. You do the same. No one says anything for a long time. It's not just the ink, or the papyrus, or the clever proverbs. It's the silence between the lines. The way a blank page can feel like a door. The next morning, you're up before the sun, not because anyone calls for you, or because Mena kicks your door open with a scroll in his teeth, though that has happened more than once, but because you're excited, nervous even. Like a goose sensing migration or a cat that knows it's about to be gifted a fish head. Today is market inventory. Now, you might be thinking, thrilling, let me grab my sandals and run toward bureaucracy. But weirdly, yes, you do. Because inventory day means getting out of the scriptorium. It means walking among stalls and cellars, counting barley sacks and fish bundles, and making sure that the temple's ledgers match the actual chaos of reality. It's your job now to reconcile the sacred scrolls with smelly baskets of lentils, the divine and the mundane. You meet Mena outside the granary. He's chewing on a piece of dried fig, squinting at the rising light. You ready to count goats? You blink. Wait, there are goats today? Oh yes, he says, grinning. There are always goats. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian temples didn't just conduct worship. They functioned like full-blown administrative centers. They owned fields, herds, workshops, and granaries. Scribes were responsible for keeping detailed records of everything from how much grain was in storage to how many sandals the workers needed next month. You start in the Eastern Market, under canvas awnings that flap like lazy birds. A fishmonger greets Mena with a joke about spoiled dates, and Mena retorts with something about the fish smelling better than the priests. You trail behind, stylus in hand, trying not to gag at the smell of fermented onions. You tally sacks, mark bundles, write shorthand notations like you were born to itemize cabbages. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes developed entire systems of symbols and abbreviations for fast inventory work. One mark for a healthy goat, another for an angry one, and yet another for a goat that looked like it might die of spite before sundown. They were like emoji, but somehow more judgmental. A merchant brings over a basket and shouts, 16 radishes! Mena gives you a sideways glance and says, what do you think? You squint, count, 15 and a half, if that one's even legal. Good eye, he says, and scratches something onto his board. By midday, your stylus is sticky with pomegranate juice. Your sandals are dusty, and your papyrus sheet has a corner chewed by, yes, an actual goat. You pause under a sycamore tree. Someone's playing a flute nearby. Badly. A scribe across the square is arguing with a baker about whether a cracked amphora counts as a full unit. You lean against the tree trunk, stretch your back, and glance at your tally sheet. It's beautiful, ugly, chaotic, crossed out in places, but beautiful. Every mark represents something real, something that happened. A sack lifted, a goat bleated, a grain counted. And now it's part of the record. Historians still argue whether these market tallies were preserved or simply used temporarily. Some believe the notes were copied into formal ledgers and then erased or burned. Others think scribes kept them tucked away as personal logs, a kind of diary of the dirt and bartering of daily life. You'd keep this sheet, if it were up to you. There's a smudge shaped like a fish and a crooked thumbprint that might be from a fig vendor with suspiciously inky fingers. Mena finishes haggling over baskets and gestures. Time to head to the ledger house. You nod, and together you walk back through the noise. A boy chases a chicken. A woman throws a sandal at him. A flute player starts up again. This time, even worse. You arrive at the record hall just as the sun tilts west. Inside, the cool air smells of old ink and oiled wood. Scrolls line the walls in neat cubbies, each labeled in red. You recognize some. Harvest reports, festival expenses, grain loans. Mena pulls out a blank one and flattens it on the table. Your turn. You look down. Your notes are messy, real, immediate. Now comes the ritual part, turning reality into permanence. You dip your pen. The ink flows. And you begin on the 17th day of Paopi, under the eye of Ra. The market inventory proceeded. It's meditative. The scratch of reed against scroll. the cooling breeze through the window, the quiet shuffle of another scribe walking past with a cup of water, and slowly the mess becomes order. The chaos becomes clarity. The radishes become, well, still radishes, but dignified ones. Honorably counted, Mena doesn't hover. He trusts you now. And that small, silent trust feels bigger than any praise. You finish the scroll and let it dry. There's a certain weight to it now. A feeling that this moment matters. Not because you counted goats and yams, but because you caught a day and wrapped it in words. Outside, the last sunlight stretches like golden ink across the rooftops. The sky dims. You roll the scroll, tie it with cord, place it gently in its cubby, and you smile. Because today, you wrote the world. The next week starts with a sound you now recognize in your bones. The distinct clatter of ink stones being ground in early morning light. You stretch, rise, and shuffle into your tunic. Your joints crack like a papyrus sheet that's been stored too long in a dry cupboard. You're becoming one of them, a scribe with morning rituals and ink-stained thumbs. Welcome to the club. But today is different. Today, Mena takes you beyond the ledger halls and market stalls. Today, you're going to the palace archive. Now, before you get too excited, no, it's not gold leaf scrolls and velvet cushions. This isn't some Netflix historical drama with soft lighting and tragic romance. It's dust, layers of it, and endless rows of reed-woven baskets stacked with reports, contracts, shipping manifests, and the occasional love letter misfiled under grain disputes. Still, for a scribe, it's a temple, a memory machine. The walk there is quiet. Even the city seems to hush its usual bustle as you near the palace walls. You pass a row of soldiers in russet kilts polishing their spears. One raises an eyebrow at your ink-streaked face, but says nothing. Mena knocks once on a wooden gate, and an old man inside waves you in without looking up. His beard is long enough to get tangled in the shelf labels. "New fish?" he grumbles. "Freshly caught," Mena replies. Mainstream historical fact. Egypt's royal archives were vast, complex systems housing contracts, laws, census records, temple correspondence, and royal decrees. They were managed by elite scribes who could trace the lineage of a jar shipment back 3 dynasties, and weren't above correcting kings who misremembered dates. The archive's interior is low-lit and labyrinthine. Clay jars line the shelves beside stacked scrolls and folded leather packets. You pass a series of cubby holes labeled in faded ink. Wheat loans, burial goods, royal oaths, boat licenses. You stop. Wait, boat licenses? Mena shrugs. Even pharaohs hate unregistered canoes. He leads you to a long table where a young woman is carefully unrolling a brittle document with shell tweezers. "Your task," he says, "is to transcribe this." You lean in. The scroll crackles like dry reeds. The ink is brown, not black, likely made from rust and soot. The handwriting is elegant but uneven, with corrections marked in red and tiny notations along the edge. It's a land dispute. 2 Brasiers arguing over inheritance rights near Memphis. The drama, practically oozes off the papyrus. You skim a section where one brother accuses the other of bribing the town reed cutter for favorable borders. Honestly, you'd watch this show. Quirky tidbit. Some legal scrolls were so juicy they were recopied and circulated as moral tales. A famous case involved a man who claimed divine intervention made his goats multiply. He was later caught hiding extra goats behind a painted reed screen. Moral? Never lie to a scribe with access to census logs. You start copying. The process is slow, almost reverent. Each character must be precise, each margin even. Mena watches your first few lines, then leaves you to it. The woman beside you is copying a tax edict with terrifying speed and accuracy. Her stylus sounds like a beetle tapping on polished wood. You glance at her sheet, back at yours. Yours looks like it was done by a sleep-deprived cat, but she gives you a small nod. Encouragement. You'll take it. Hours pass. The dust turns golden in the filtered light. A pot of water is passed around. Someone sneezes, and 100 scrolls shudder in sympathy. Historians still argue whether palace archivists considered themselves historians or bureaucrats. Some believe they understood the gravity of preserving a nation's story. Others think they were just doing a job with a little flair for drama. You're starting to think it was both, because by the time you finish, your back aches, your wrist is sore, and your eyes are beginning to blur. But you feel something, not pride exactly, something older. Like you've placed one more stone in a pyramid no one will ever finish, but everyone will see. Mena returns, reads over your copy, and nods. She would have won that case, he mutters, pointing to one particularly sharp clause. You chuckle. Too bad she's been dead 300 years. He shrugs. Some victories are slow. You help rewrap the scrolls. The old man from earlier returns and grumbles something about missing ledgers from the flood year. Then he hands you a woven bag containing 5 fresh scrolls. Deliver these to the Temple North Archive. And don't drop them, or misfile them, or breathe too hard. You nod solemnly. I'll do my best. Outside, the light is blinding. You shield your eyes, scrolls tucked under your arm like a baby hawk. The streets of Thebes stretch before you, and you realize this is it. This is your job. Not glamorous, not heroic, but sacred in its own way. Carrying memory forward, one scroll at a time, you head north along the winding streets of Thebes, the scrolls tucked under your arm like fragile secrets. Every uneven cobblestone feels slightly more treacherous with ancient paperwork, riding shotgun, and you begin to understand why scribes often developed a specific gait. 1 part dignity, 1 part scroll preservation. The city around you hums with its usual chaos. Vendors calling out prices for figs and flatbread. Goats knocking over water jars. Children dragging reeds like swords. The smell of fresh bread mixes with something more musky. Wet linen drying in the sun. A donkey sneezes dramatically in your path, and you wonder if scroll insurance is a thing. At last, you reach the temple's northern archive. It's tucked behind a small courtyard shaded by date palms and dominated by a low, wide building made of sun-baked mud brick. The doorway is cool and dark, and the moment you step through, the world quiets. Not in a creepy way, more like the hush of a library mixed with the reverence of a chapel. Mainstream historical fact. Temple archives in ancient Egypt weren't just record-keeping centers. They served religious, economic, and even judicial functions. Scribes here might record festival offerings one day and tally livestock donations the next. These archives often held centuries' worth of data, some of which later influenced Greek and Roman scholars. The man at the front table barely looks up. Delivery? You nod, placing the scrolls on a reed mat. He reaches for one, squinting at the seal. Ledger logs. Boring, he mumbles, but takes them anyway. You linger, unsure whether to leave or stay. That's when someone taps your shoulder. A young woman in a linen wrap points to a half-unrolled scroll on a side table. Help me cross-check this. They've repeated the line about barley tax twice. You blink. Is that bad? She gives you a look. Only if you like being cursed by angry farmers. You sit beside her and start comparing the two versions, original and copy. Sure enough, there it is. The same phrase repeated, probably a sleepy scribe's hiccup. The woman chuckles softly. You know, one mistake like that can change an entire land record. Imagine someone getting double taxed because you wrote 12 bushels instead of 6. You nod, but your stomach tightens. Suddenly, the work feels heavier, weightier. Historians still argue whether these temple scribes saw themselves as guardians of truth or just administrative tools, she says absently, brushing papyrus fibers from her lap. Personally, I think they knew. Her name is Neferet. She's been at the archive for 3 seasons. Sharp, efficient, and a little terrifying. Her reed pens are filed to surgical precision, and she has a habit of quoting ancient proverbs mid-sentence. Her favorite? He who forgets ink will remember debt. You like her immediately. Together, you sort through the barley records, catching errors like fishermen snagging wriggling tilapia from the Nile. It's oddly satisfying. Each correction feels like setting the universe back on its tracks. After a while, she leans back, stretches her arms, and says, "Want to see something weird?" You absolutely do. She leads you to a far corner of the archive. There, half covered in a linen cloth, is a scroll the size of a door frame. Unrolled, it stretches the entire length of the room. Quirky tidbit. Some ceremonial scrolls in Egypt reached absurd lengths, up to 40 meters, containing elaborate texts, celestial maps, or lists of temple assets. The longest known example, a mortuary text so large it needed 2 people just to turn the pages. This one's from the year of the Black Nile, Neferet explains. Huge flood season. They had to resurvey every field between here and Abydos. You trace your fingers along a water-damaged edge. How long did it take? She smirks. Still not done. We're recopying it this month. A moment of silence passes. The kind that settles like dust in a beam of light. You realize how small you are, how vast and ongoing this all is. The scrolls don't care if you're tired. The names inside them outlive the people they belong to. Outside, the light begins to shift. Afternoon is melting into evening. Neferet rolls the giant scroll with surprising grace and tucks it back into its cloth wrap. "You'll get used to the weight," she says, as though reading your thoughts. "Of history, of ink." You nod, but part of you isn't sure if you want to get used to it. Part of you wants to stay this awestruck forever. You help clean up the table. A few scribes drift past, murmuring about updates to livestock quotas and issues with fish pricing. One mentions a shipment of papyrus stuck upriver. Another grumbles about a misprinted map that moved an entire village 5 miles west. And suddenly, you realize that all of it, grain, goats, ghost towns, is recorded, pinned to scrolls like insects to corkboard. Nothing disappears. Not really. Not if someone keeps writing. As you leave the temple archive, the scent of dried reeds and old ink clings to your clothes. Neferet tosses you a smirk. "You'll be back?" You grin. You sound certain. She raises a brow. "You're already walking like one of us." She's right. You are. And not just in posture, in spirit. Because by now, you're not just copying. You're remembering. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows that stretch across the worn stones of Thebes like the brushstrokes of a sleepy god. You and Mena walk slowly, neither in a hurry, both wrapped in the kind of companionable silence that scribes seem to share, once they've inhaled enough ink fumes and shared enough proofreading grief. Your feet ache, your shoulders too, but it's the good kind of tired. The kind that says you did something today, even if that something was fixing a barley tax error and narrowly avoiding an economic catastrophe involving 7 confused farmers and 1 very assertive goat. You arrive at a quiet corner of the city, near a workshop that doesn't look like much from the outside. Just a mud brick building with a modest doorway and a lintel etched with barely visible hieroglyphs. Inside, though, is where magic happens. The penmaker's shop. It's cooler inside, and the air smells like reed shavings and heated beeswax. A man with a gray beard and a head wrap looks up from behind a work table cluttered with tools, bundles of reeds, and several half-carved pens. He gives Mena a nod and gestures toward a woven basket near the hearth. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian scribes made their own writing tools or sourced them from specialists who prepared and trimmed reeds, hollowed them into nibs, and polished them to a fine point. The best pens came from Nile-grown reeds, dense, straight, and just the right texture to hold ink without leaking or fraying too fast. Mena digs through the basket like a baker searching for the perfect loaf. You wander over to a nearby table where discarded pen tips sit like broken teeth. Each one a small, worn-out soldier of bureaucracy. The pen maker, whose name is Bakenrenef, notices your interest. "First time here?" he asks, voice gravelly. You nod. "It's quieter than I expected." He chuckles. "Only because the pens don't scream when they snap." You smile politely. Then he reaches under the counter and places a few fresh reeds on the table. "Here," he says, "pick one." You feel a bit like you're choosing a wand. Some are longer, some thicker, One is slightly curved, but polished so smoothly it reflects the flicker of the workshop's oil lamp. You finally choose a slender reed with a balanced weight and a slightly darker tone, like it's been aging patiently, waiting for a hand like yours. Good eye, Bakenrenef says, trimming it with a blade of copper as easily as slicing dates. Reeds are like scribes. The best ones bend before they break. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes customize their pens with wax seals, personal carvings, or even tiny bits of ribbon tied near the base. Part practicality, part flair. And yes, a few show-offs added colored beads. Call it ancient office bling. Mena pays with a few grain tokens, and you leave the shop holding your first real pen. Not a training reed. Not a borrowed one. Yours. The weight of it in your palm is barely there, but symbolically, it's heavier than your first tax scroll. Outside, the light has turned amber, and Thebes is preparing for evening. You hear music in the distance, pipes and clapping hands. Someone celebrating something, maybe a birth or a good harvest, or just surviving another day in the bureaucracy of the Nile. You follow Mena past the scribal school where you first smudged ink across your robe, past the temple gate where you once forgot your lesson slate and had to pretend you were praying just to avoid a lecture. Every step feels familiar now, lived in, like walking a circle that never closes, just gets wider. And then Mena stops in front of the quiet, vine-covered wall of your scribe quarters. He turns to you. "You're ready," he says simply. You open your mouth to protest. Some joke about still smudging dates or misplacing scrolls. But he stops you with a raised hand. "I mean it," he says. "Not just the work, the mindset, the reverence, the weird joy when ink hits clean papyrus." You swallow the lump forming in your throat. "I thought there'd be a ceremony." He shrugs. "This is it." "Very underwhelming," you mutter. He grins. "That's how it always is." Historians still argue whether becoming a scribe was marked by formal rites or more subtle acknowledgments. Some temple texts suggest public readings or inscriptions into the Book of Names. Others mention simple declarations by mentors. Either way, the transition was more spiritual than theatrical. You nod slowly, the full weight of the day pressing down. "I got a pen," you say, lifting it slightly. Mena chuckles. "Then write something worth keeping." He walks off toward the main hall, probably to wrestle with another tax record or alphabetize grain tallies. Activities you now fully understand are both noble and mind-melting. You sit by the door for a while, watching the sun dip behind the palm fronds. The breeze smells faintly of figs and dust. You hold the pen. You hold silence. And you realize something. This isn't an end. It's the moment before the beginning. Night settles over Thebes like a soft reed mat, woven from starlight and desert hush. You lie awake longer than you'd planned, not from restlessness, but from the afterglow of realization. You're a scribe, not a student, not an apprentice, not a smudger of names or borrower of brushes. You've crossed that invisible line, quiet and ceremonial in its own way. But then, as always, the next day begins. No parade, No choral procession, just Mena knocking on your door and muttering, "Inventory day, get your belt pouch." You groan. The pen ceremony glow lasted 8 hours. He grins. Welcome to the real scribal life. You head out through sleepy streets, past yawning market vendors and temple cats that slink between pottery stalls like they own the economy. And in a way, they do. Inventory, as it turns out, is an event, not of celebration, but of tedium. You and Mena join 3 other scribes inside a warehouse near the city's storage quarter. It's packed with jars, crates, baskets, and sacks of everything from lentils to linen bolts to tiny vials of scented oil labeled with faded glyphs. The task: count, record, verify, repeat. You open your first ledger and begin. Mainstream historical fact. Inventory scribes in ancient Egypt were responsible for tallying temple offerings, royal stores, and agricultural surplus. Their accuracy was crucial, not just for resource management, but for temple rituals. A missing jar of beer wasn't just a supply issue. It meant a deity might go unappeased. You spend the morning counting amphorae, one by one. Then you move on to oil jars. Then, lengths of copper wire. Each item logged in a neat, calm hand. Mena's method is faster, his pen strokes like measured breaths. You try to match him, but your glyphs still wobble slightly when you're tired or hungry. Or, in this case, both. Around midday, the warehouse grows hot. You wipe sweat from your brow using a sleeve already stained from 3 spills of ink, 2 from your pen, and 1 from a startled donkey that kicked over the scribe table in hour 1. That was fun. Break, Mena says, gesturing to a shaded corner. You sit on a crate labeled rose petals for temple use and bite into a fig roll someone's mother sent in a basket. A younger scribe named He plops down beside you. He's barely 15 and already speaks like he invented sarcasm. So this is what the gods meant when they said divine duty, you snort. The divinity of counting barley sacks. Do you think anyone ever lied on these? He asks. You consider it. Maybe. But the penalties were serious. Historians still argue whether scribes were universally honest or sometimes complicit in creative accounting, especially in royal or temple contexts. Some tomb inscriptions show idealized honesty, while others hint at convenient forgetfulness, particularly when taxes or tributes were involved. Lunch ends. You return to work. This time, it's textiles. Rolls of linen, dyed saffron, indigo, russet. You run your fingers across one bolt, marveling at how finely it's woven. You pause, take a small scrap, and use it to clean your reed pen tip. Practical reuse, sure, but also satisfying. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes favored linen pen cloths, not just for cleaning, but for luck. A few even embroidered them with tiny prayers or symbols. If you saw a scribe with a patched-up, ink-blotted cloth tied to their belt, odds are it had history, maybe even superstition. You press on, The sun dips lower. The final list is long, but you're nearly done. You double-check the last page. All columns filled, all quantities confirmed. You sign the ledger's bottom edge with your personal glyph. Newly assigned, newly proud. A swirl beside a reed, chosen to represent clarity in writing. Mena glances over your shoulder. No mistakes, he says, impressed. Maybe that pen was magic. You smile. Or maybe I'm just that good. Don't push it. Together, you and the team stack the finished scrolls into a wooden chest, seal it with clay, and mark the lid with the date and purpose. Then, scrolls in hand, you walk to the central archive building. Even the air seems quieter here. You step inside. A narrow hall lined with scroll niches and low tables. A few older scribes nod as you pass. One is sketching a map. Another is bent over a genealogical chart so complex it could make a crocodile weep. You place your finished ledgers into their labeled slot and exhale deeply. Done. But as you turn to go, a scroll falls from the table. You pick it up. It's old, fragile. The label is faded, but you can just make out the subject. Sacrificial records, high flood year, 13th dynasty. You hesitate, then gently place it back on the table, smoothing its edges. There's something awe-inspiring about being part of this lineage, about holding what others wrote down thousands of days before. Their lists, their errors, their attempts to pin a moment in time before it drifted away like desert sand. You leave the archive slower than you entered. The walk home is quiet. The moon has risen now, bright and steady. And in your hand, your pen, still ink-stained, still warm. You wake to the rhythmic scratch of a reed pen. Not your own, but someone's nearby. It's early still. The sky hasn't turned fully pink. Just that soft, bruised blue that happens when the stars are almost gone, but the sun hasn't quite arrived. You sit up slowly, back stiff from the low-slung bench and dreams heavy with numbers. Today is not a day for ledgers. Today is Poetry Day. Well, not officially. There is no Poetry Day in the temple's official calendar. But among scribes, especially those with a secret stash of half-inked fragments and margin doodles, it's a kind of tradition. Once a month, give or take, scribes meet at a quiet spot outside the main complex to read aloud. Not for pay, not for record keeping, but for pleasure. And you're finally invited. You head out barefoot, sandals swinging from your fingers, letting the stone path cool your soles. Along the way, you pass a goat sleeping beside a basket of dried reeds, a symbolic reminder of the very start of your training. You grin at it. It snorts in its sleep. The gathering spot is just beyond the garden walls, near a bend in the canal. It's shaded by a tamarisk tree with roots that curl like knotted scripes. 5 scribes are already there, seated on rolled mats and overturned baskets. Mena's among them, of course. He's always early when it doesn't involve taxes. Mainstream historical fact. Egyptian scribes wrote not only state and religious documents, but also hymns, wisdom literature, and poetic texts. These weren't side jobs. They were integral parts of scribal identity. Writing for beauty or reflection was considered a mental offering to the gods, especially Thoth, the deity of writing and wisdom. You take a seat. Someone hands you a warm barley cake. Another passes around a shared inkstone, blackened and chipped at the edge. The ritual begins. Each scribe reads something of their own, or something old, or something found in the margin of a damaged scroll. Mena recites a satirical hymn to lazy goats. Another scribe offers a tribute to her grandmother's sandals. Sturdier than most men's promises, she jokes. Everyone chuckles softly. You're up next. You hesitate. Then pull out a folded scrap of palimpsest papyrus from your pouch. On it, a single stanza written weeks ago in a stolen moment between festivals and funerals. You read it aloud, your voice unsure at first, then clearer. Beneath the ink, the world turns slow, a name, a mark, a river's flow. Let line and glyph be how we know what passed and stayed and chose to go. There's a pause, then soft nods. One older scribe hums approval. Mena raises his brow in amused surprise. Didn't know you had rhythm, he says. Neither did I. The breeze stirs the tamarisk leaves. A bird calls overhead. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes composed glyph riddles, short poems using double-meaning hieroglyphs. One unearthed example reads, I carry a fish, but swim not. My eye sees backwards. Who am I? The answer, the reed pen. You spend the rest of the morning listening, laughing, passing around dates and roasted chickpeas. You notice how ink has stained everyone's fingertips, like a shared badge. You all carry the same marks, reminders of craft, of error, of hours hunched over sacred names and goat rosters. Eventually, the circle disbands. Some go to transcribe temple decrees, others to clean their brushes or prepare scrolls for tomorrow's funerary registry. You and Mena walk in the direction of the Nile, neither in a hurry. There's time before your next task. Time to breathe. You reach the riverbank. There, boat builders are shaping cedar planks for a priest's bark. You watch them for a moment. The tools they use, stone scrapers, copper chisels, remind you of your own. Delicate, exacting, unforgiving. Mena breaks the silence. You ever wonder if anything we write will matter? You glance at him, like, in 100 years? Try 1,000. You shrug. Does it need to? He considers this, kicking a pebble into the reeds. Historians still argue whether Egyptian scribes wrote with posterity in mind or simply as part of daily ritual. Some suggest a conscious desire for legacy. Others argue it was obedience, tradition, and divine duty, not ambition, that drove them. You don't answer. Instead, you pick up a flat stone, dip your pen in the travel ink pot, and write one word across its surface. Listen. Then you toss it into the river. The ink runs, of course. The water claims it, but the motion, smooth, deliberate, defiant, feels sacred. Mena grins. Poet now, huh? Maybe. The sun's high now, cutting a bright line across the rooftops of Thebes. You know there are scrolls waiting, names to copy, records to clean. But for now, there is only this moment. Still, sun-warmed and quiet. You turn to go, but the path doesn't feel the same as before. Maybe because your feet are bare. Maybe because your heart is full. Maybe because for the first time, you don't just feel like a scribe. You feel like part of the story. Back at the temple complex, you return to the scriptorium, not for an assignment, not under orders, just because. The door creaks familiarly as you push it open. Inside, it smells like soot, warm dust, and dried ink. Your version of home. You move to your bench, same spot as always, but the sun falls through the high lattice windows in a slightly different angle today. It catches the edge of your reed pen case, making it glow like old gold. You take that as a sign there's a blank sheet waiting for you. Not the start of a ledger, not a state inventory, a real blank. Smooth, fine papyrus, stitched faintly along the grain lines like ancient fabric. Someone left it as a gift. Or maybe you prepared it yourself and forgot. It doesn't matter. This sheet isn't for the record house or the temple. It's for you. You dip your reed into the water pot. Swirl the brush into a cake of black ink. And then, without a plan or a rubric, you begin to write. Your hand moves slow. Each stroke feels alive, like it's being pulled from somewhere older than memory, etched in your bones. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian scribes trained for over a decade to reach professional fluency. They mastered complex grammar, formal hieroglyphs, cursive scripts, hieratic and demotic, and even Greek in later periods. A true scribe wasn't just a clerk. They were historians, artists, theologians, poets, and you? You're part of that tradition now. You write a story about the market boy with only one sandal and a brilliant head for barley math. You add a poem about the temple ibis that steals dates from your lunch basket. You copy a proverb you once overheard while eavesdropping on two arguing cooks. Then you change the ending. It's your scroll now. No one's watching. No one's grading. This is how it's supposed to feel. You pause to stretch. Your fingers ache. Ink clings under your nails. There's an ink blot on your knee where you rested your hand too long. You smile at the mess of it. Quirky tidbit. Some scribes intentionally added minute imperfections into their personal writings. An extra dot, a reversed glyph, an odd margin break, as a way to sign their work without using names. Like a quiet nod to future readers. Yes, I was here. You finish the scroll. Roll it gently. Seal the edge with a dab of honey-thick resin. Then you walk it to the small basket beneath your bed, your private archive. Inside are scraps, poems, discarded drafts, scribbles you were too embarrassed to share, but they're yours. And in that tiny personal archive, you see the soul of every scribe who's ever lived. It's not the state scrolls that matter most, not the declarations or inventories. It's the heartbeat between them, the lines someone wrote when no one asked them to, the jokes that didn't land, the metaphor that didn't quite work, the truth scribbled sideways in the margin of a barley receipt. You stand, spine cracking lightly. Outside, the sun sinks. You hear the temple choir again, this time faint, like a memory. Mena passes by your door. "You coming to the evening chant?" he asks. You shake your head. "I'm tired. Long day of poetry." Something like that. He nods, grinning like he knows exactly what you mean, and disappears around the corner. You stay behind. The ink has cooled. The room quiets. You lie back on your mat, arms behind your head, and close your eyes. And now, the wind down begins. The scroll is sealed. The light has faded. Your breath softens, matching the gentle rustle of papyrus fibers settling under stone weights. Around you, the quiet deepens, not hollow, but full. Full of stories, of names remembered, of days pressed flat between lines of black and red. The scent of ink still lingers on your fingers, sharp, earthy, grounding. It smells like truth, like care, like someone took the time to notice something and to write it down. Outside, the night wraps around the temple like linen around a resting god. The Nile flows quietly under the moon, its surface soft and unbroken. A single ibis walks the bank, pausing every few steps as if remembering something. Above it all, stars blink into place, unbothered, unchanging, ancient. You've done your part. You've learned the forms, endured the rituals, found your voice, and now you've written not for orders, but for meaning, for memory, for you. Let the parchment curl a little at the corners. Let the ink dry gently in the quiet. Let your eyelids grow heavy with the weight of a job well done. Sleep now, scribe. Your scrolls are safe, and your story, it's just beginning. Sweet dreams.